As the server set their meals on the table, a sense of weight increased within Ethan, who had planned this evening in an attempt to save his marriage. However, nothing could have anticipated what transpired next. Maddie released a deep breath, setting down her glass of wine with an unnerving composure. She leaned towards him, her green eyes locked onto his. "Ethan," she paused, squared her shoulders. "I'm leaving you." A deafening silence enveloped the table like a tidal wave. Ethan remained unfazed, offering only a smile. Maddie's certainty faltered for the first time that night. Her mouth opened, uncertainty crossing her face, and then, before she could speak further, the restaurant doors creaked open. Ethan barely glanced away. Yet Maddie paled. For standing there was the last person she ever thought she would see, a man who had come for her. Before we delve further into the narrative, let me learn your perspective from the comments section below. If you appreciate tales similar to this one, remember to subscribe and click the notification bell to stay updated on future installments. Over the past 20 years, Ethan Carter crafted a life that many men merely envision. At 42, he was a self-made architect in Austin, Texas, renowned for his keen design sense and strategic business acumen. He began at the bottom, balancing college with long hours at construction sites, scrutinizing blueprints under flickering fluorescent lights, mastering every facet of what made a structure robust, durable, and ageless. This same ethos steered him throughout life. Construct something sturdy, invest in the foundation, ensure no adversity could shatter it. His career mirrored this credo. Ethan's contemporary office structures and personal residences, all bearing his name, served as testament to his skill, unyielding dedication, and capacity for enduring creation. Clients esteemed him, peers admired him, and his staff recognized him as a leader who demanded excellence because he settled for nothing less. Yet, beyond the accolades and prosperity, Ethan assessed his true riches by his family. His union with Madeline, whom he had always referred to as Maddie, had once formed the foundation of his universe. At 39, she remained breathtakingly beautiful, retaining the enchanting smile that had captivated him during their 20s. She possessed charisma, intellect, and an irresistible allure that drew people to her. When they initially crossed paths, she was a vibrant marketing graduate brimming with ambition and a spirit as passionate as his own. Together, they had constructed a life. Two stunning children, an exquisite home, cherished moments that, for a time, seemed unbreakable. For years, Ethan perceived their affection as durable and sturdy like the architectural structures he crafted, designed to endure the trials of time. Lately, however, fissures have surfaced in this foundation. At first, these cracks were subtle, resembling fine fractures on a wall, barely perceptible unless one scrutinized closely. It was Maddie's habitual late arrivals and her evasive, questionable excuses that stirred his suspicion. The way she concealed her phone screen upon his entry, swiftly dismissing notifications, the manner in which she no longer regarded him with the same affectionate gaze as before, merely treating him like an ordinary household item, useful, ubiquitous, yet uninteresting. Ethan wasn't prone to hasty judgments, but he relied on his intuition, and his gut feeling suggested something amiss. Initially, he dismissed it as stress or the inevitable fluctuations in a long marriage. They had faced tough periods earlier, times when work engrossed him and parental duties drained them both. However, this situation seemed distinct. A chasm existed now, a chasm growing wider with each passing day, regardless of his efforts to mend it. Their conversations were reduced to transactional exchanges about the children, errands, schedules, all except meaningful discussion. The warmth had dissipated, replaced by something chillier, something detached. To add to their woes, there were lies, initially small but undeniably present, the business trips with questionable explanations, the unmet encounters with supposed friends, the lingering fragrance of a cologne not his on her attire. Ethan, who had spent decades crafting spaces meant for endurance, now found himself unable to dispel the sensation that his marriage was gradually falling apart, fragment by fragment, in the house they had jointly constructed. The Midnight Bistro embodied a subtle yet striking elegance. Situated within Austin's core, it combined an alluring intimacy and sophistication, illuminated by soft amber light, adorned with polished wood accents, and boasting floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views. Background jazz provided ambience without overpowering the conversation. This was a restaurant where significant occasions unfolded, deals were sealed, and meaningful moments took place under candlelight amidst carefully arranged dishes. Ethan had purposely chosen this venue, recalling Maddie's fondness for it from their shared past. It had been years since they last dined here, but he distinctly remembered how she affectionately referred to it as our spot during their exclusive moments together. He had carefully planned the evening, securing a prime table by the window well in advance. He exceeded expectations, procuring her preferred vintage, a rich red wine reminiscent of old love letters and secret confessions, and arranging a personalized gift, a dainty gold bracelet adorned with their wedding date within its closure. His actions weren't driven by need, but optimism, seeking to bridge the gap between them before their distance became irreversible. Sitting opposite her, he contemplated if she sensed his endeavors. Tonight, Maddie was as radiant as ever, with her golden hair cascading softly over her shoulders and her emerald gown accentuating her form, a reminder of the woman who had captured his heart. Her expression conveyed a calculated distance, hinting at duties instead of desires. She had consented to dinner, yet her presence felt incomplete. The sense of detachment was evident in her minimal eye contact, her polite wine sips, and the subtle air of impatience, as if she were eager for an ending rather than enjoying the present. Ethan endeavored to dismiss this sensation, attempting to pierce the tension with a fake grin, lifting his glass for a toast. To us, he offered, hoping she'd decipher the silent appeal in his words. Maddie hesitated momentarily before returning the gesture. To us, she responded, but there was no fervor, only the insincere politeness of fulfilling a commitment. He should have recognized then, should have comprehended that this evening would not be the transformative moment he had envisioned, yet he persisted, still harboring the hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they could mend what was fractured. As soon as the waiters served their meals, Maddie put down her glass, leaned slightly forward, and in a voice as mellow as the wine she'd been drinking, revealed, "I've been unfaithful to you for 2 years, and I'm leaving you." Her words fell with a silent finality, like a stone sinking into deep water. Ethan experienced a brief moment of the world spinning before regaining balance, a surreal pause where his mind struggled to comprehend the heavy truth. Instead of reacting with fury or disbelief, he didn't ask for explanations or beg for answers. Instead, he smiled. It wasn't forced or calculated, it was genuine, raw, and knowing a reaction that made Maddie stumble for the first time that evening. Her eyebrows knitted together in bewilderment, as if she had imagined this conversation countless times, but hadn't considered such a response. Prior to her ability to speak or assert control, the restaurant's door creaked open, and the soft clatter of heels on marble, combined with hushed conversations, receded into the distance as he entered. Ryan Hale, standing tall with broad shoulders, impeccably dressed in a navy blazer suit, oozed an unchallenged arrogance that only those who had never been refused possess. Ethan didn't need to turn to verify his identity. It was evident from the pallor of Maddie's face, the involuntary tightening of her hand against the tablecloth, and the sudden appearance of a woman overwhelmed by a disaster of her own making. Ethan calmly reclined in his seat, taking a leisurely sip of his wine, unblinking eyes fixed on Maddie. "Indeed," he said, placing his glass down deliberately, "things have just become intriguing." A wave of recognition swept through the restaurant, gradually building like a swell. The chatter dwindled, eyes turned to the newcomer who entered, and in a split second, Ethan sensed a change in the room. It wasn't simple curiosity, it was disdain. Some whispered to their table mates, others exchanged significant looks, but no one greeted him. No friendly gestures, no casual greetings, just cold, contained scorn typically reserved for individuals whose past actions were notorious. Ryan Hale appeared unaware or indifferent, striding with the ease of a man who had never been compelled to defend his actions, oblivious or uncaring about the burden his name carried in certain circles. Ethan shifted, observing Maddie's response. She sat tense, her fingers digging into the cloth table cover, her face frozen between disbelief and poorly concealed fear. For the first time that night, she seemed afraid, not of Ethan, not even of the situation unfolding before her, but of something hidden, something she hadn't anticipated. She aimed to steer this dialogue, decide the course of this evening, but she'd erred significantly. Unbeknownst to her, Ethan was already aware of all details. His eyes darted towards Ryan, and for the first time in years, Ethan admitted the truth about the man in front of him. It wasn't merely the affair. This wasn't another man stealing his wife. This was a man who had intentionally obstructed Ethan, systematically, meticulously, someone who had never wished to see him prosper. Ryan Hale wasn't simply an attorney, he was a gatekeeper, the type of person who used power like a scalpel, disguising discrimination as policy, maintaining men like Ethan in their positions by claiming standards and protocol. Years ago, when Ethan was on the verge of securing the largest contract of his career, a multi-million-dollar city redevelopment project, it was Ryan who blocked it. Ethan wasn't rejected due to his lack of expertise or inferior designs. Instead, he was considered an uncertain prospect, as Ryan had bluntly stated in a private gathering. This seemingly neutral term translated to, "You don't belong here." Ethan persistently challenged the verdict, scrutinizing Ryan's past legal actions, seeking evidence of his long-standing practice of hindering projects led by minority firms, usually cloaked in bureaucratic red tape and legal technicalities. Despite this history, Ethan never forgot the sting of that past rejection, the swallowed humiliation, and the forced resilience to thrive despite individuals like Ryan Hale. Now, years later, Ethan found himself facing his adversary, the person who had tried to undermine him and dismiss him as insignificant, sitting opposite Ethan's wife, the woman who once professed her support for everything Ethan represented. His jaw stiffened, fingers knotting within his palm before he steeled himself to unwind. Not just yet. Turning to Maddie, he let the heaviness of his restraint descend before addressing her. "It wasn't merely dishonesty you exhibited," he said, in a low, deliberate tone, with an undercurrent of something menacing. "You opted for alliance with a man who contradicts everything I stand for." Maddie's breath caught, her lips slightly parting as if she wished to speak, but nothing emerged. She hadn't anticipated this. She had braced herself for anger, perhaps even sorrow. What she wasn't ready for was this level of composed, chilling insight. Ethan allowed the tension to linger, observing as understanding dawned upon her. "Answer me," he continued, subtly tilting his head. "Was it effortless? To disregard what I warned you about him? To ignore his true nature? Or was it indifference?" Maddie gulped audibly, her Adam's apple prominently bobbing. "Ethan, He interjected swiftly and calmly, voice still low and unnervingly composed. "You made your decision." Ryan sensed the discussion was heading towards uncomfortable ground. "I believe this isn't the suitable moment or venue." Ethan halted him with a glance, keeping his peace. "We both are well aware of who you are," Ethan stated firmly, his voice unwavering, "and everyone here in this restaurant seems to concur." Ryan glanced around, and for the first time, Ethan noticed a hint of vulnerability. The understanding that this wasn't a private spat, but a public exposure. The shields of authority and influence Ryan had always depended on appeared a tad weaker. Maddie remained rigid, her knuckles white from gripping her wine glass tightly, as if it were the sole thing keeping her grounded. The atmosphere crackled with unsaid words and the burden of unalterable decisions. And then Ethan did something that made them both recoil. He smiled. Ethan delved into his blazer's inner pocket, acting with measured calmness that made both Maddie and Ryan feel apprehensive. He extracted a pristine black folder, its edges crisp as if crafted for this instant. Without uttering a word, he pushed it towards them, his touch releasing it silently, causing a shiver to ripple down Maddie's back. She remained motionless, her breathing altered, shallower and faster. Contrarily, Ryan emitted a sharp sigh through his nostrils, evidently annoyed by the performance. "What's this supposed to be?" he muttered, but Ethan chose not to respond. Instead, he sat back, observing, waiting. Maddie hesitated before gently taking the folder, perusing its contents cautiously. The instant her gaze fell upon the first page, she stiffened rigidly. Ethan observed this reaction, noting the slight dilating of her pupils and the tense clench of her jaw, a sign of unease. Without turning another page, Maddie recognized the document's content. Ryan leaned closer to examine it, his initial expression unreadable, but as he scrutinized the details, his usual self-assured demeanor faded. Furrowing his brow, a hint of puzzlement transformed into something sinister, bordering on deceit. Ethan tilted his head slightly and spoke up, ending the silence. "Feel free to read it aloud, Maddie," he suggested, his tone casual. She hesitated, struggling to speak, so Ethan read it out for her instead. "For the past 6 months, you've been depleting our funds. Not in one go, that would have been too conspicuous. Instead, small transactions. A few thousand at a time, then 5,000 here and there. Always spaced out to avoid raising suspicions. But when you total it up, that amounts to over 200 grand, Maddie. $200,000 moved discreetly from our shared funds into an account under Ryan's name, he pointed out, watching Maddie's face contort as if she was trying to halt the words mid-air. An account under Ryan's name made him stiffen. "Wait, what?" Maddie responded, swiftly closing the folder, almost causing it to crumple. "Ethan, this isn't what you think," she began, her voice tense, but he merely chuckled softly. "Oh, Maddie," he replied, shaking his head. "It's exactly as you think." Ryan grabbed the folder from her hand, reopening it, scanning the figures with a growing intensity, his nostrils flaring as understanding dawned. "You've been using my name for this?" His voice held no trace of its usual assurance, replaced by something harsh and accusing. "Why did you intend to empty him out and flee with my funds, Maddie?" For the first instance that night, Maddie appeared genuinely frightened, not just startled, but truly scared. "No, it's not as you think," she replied swiftly, facing him. "I was going to explain I wasn't setting you up. Were you suggesting I planned to abandon things once your money reached my account?" Ethan smiled, slower this time, a hunter observing its prey turning against itself. "Ah," he pondered, twirling his wine glass idly. "So you didn't know. That's intriguing." Ryan turned back to Maddie, his expression ominous. "Then why the rush, pushing me to wrap things up so quickly? Were you planning to escape?" Maddie couldn't find words, because there was no deception, no alibi, no clever explanation that could save her from this predicament. Ethan sighed, shaking his head. "You believed you were shrewd, Maddie. Indeed, you did. Yet, you erred. You underestimated me, thinking I wouldn't detect the missing funds, that I wouldn't trace them. However, as soon as a sense of unease washed over me, I began investigating. And once I started looking," he leaned slightly forward, his smile now chill. "I uncovered everything." Maddie swallowed nervously, but before she could attempt to rectify her situation, Ryan abruptly rose from his seat, the chair scraping on the floor. His previous calm demeanor had vanished. He was no longer the one in control or holding the power. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd been outsmarted. "You're astonishing," he mumbled, shaking his head. "I should have seen it coming." Ethan took another leisurely sip of his wine, observing Maddie grapple for footing, trying to reclaim control over the story that had rapidly slipped from her grasp. But there was nothing left to cling to, because the truth lay right before us, in shades of gray. Ethan leisurely spun his full-bodied red wine in his glass, allowing a heavy hush to envelop the table as he absorbed it. Maddie's fingers tensed against the tablecloth, her knuckles paling as she stole a furtive glance at Ryan, who stood ramrod straight with clenched jaw. The notion that she had been manipulated just as much as Ethan was dawning on her, and for the first time since entering the restaurant, Ryan lost his air of dominance. Ethan placed his glass down and, in a measured movement, raised his hand to give a solitary nod. This was the cue. Instantaneously, the subtle hum of the restaurant altered. The sound of chairs scraping, the rustle of motion, and then individuals began to rise from their seats. A gentleman near the bar, another from a distant corner booth, followed by two women from different tables scattered around the room. Ethan didn't bother to turn and watch them. He was already aware of their identities. For months, Joel Parker, a seasoned private investigator with an air of authority that made others think twice about underestimating him, had been delving into this case. a former detective turned independent pie. His lean, weathered physique and piercing eyes that never missed a detail were intimidating to many. Casually leaning against the back of Ethan's chair, Joel nonchalantly slipped his hand into his pocket as if he had endless time. Standing beside him were two determined women, their faces reflecting a blend of controlled fury and satisfaction. They weren't random restaurant patrons, they were Ryan Hale's victims. Women whose lives he had destroyed, businesses he had undermined, and reputations he had tarnished for his own benefit. And then there was Charlotte Graves, a renowned journalist recognized for uncovering corruption in elite circles, stepped forward. Ryan's hair was neatly tied back in a ponytail, his eyes sharp like blades, already evaluating the situation before uttering a word. The room made Ryan tense up, hands clenching into fists as he surveyed the surroundings, realization coming too late. Meanwhile, Maddie seemed rooted to the spot, eyes darting anxiously between them, realizing there was nowhere to escape. Charlotte broke the quiet first. "Ryan Hale," she declared, her voice resonant and commanding. "I didn't think I'd find you here tonight, did you?" Ryan's face remained impassive, but Ethan could discern the swift calculations, the frantic search for an escape route. "I'm not sure what you believe you're accomplishing," Ryan retorted, voice low and composed. Joel laughed, shaking his head. "Yes, I think you do." He retrieved a thick sealed envelope from his pocket and placed it on the table before Ryan. "Each piece of evidence, the documents, emails, and bank statements, links you to the fraudulent contracts, secret payoffs, and shell companies used for money laundering through your business." He smirked, tilting his head, stating it's ironclad. "You've been quite active," he remarked, addressing Ryan. One of the women, Ava Marshall, advanced, her arms folded across her chest as she glared at him. "You destroyed my company," she said angrily. "You ensured I lost every client and investor because I wouldn't comply with your schemes." Ryan turned towards her, his jaw clenched, his composure faltering. You blacklisted me," the second woman, Nadia Lee, interjected. "Informed investors that my firm was a risk, that I was unstable, merely because I exposed your contracts and insider trading." Charlotte didn't let him respond. She took out her phone and displayed it. "And what do you know? It's all going to be made public tonight," she declared. Maddie winced visibly. "Wait, is this open to the public?" Maddie whispered, seeming just now to understand the magnitude of the situation. Charlotte's smile was razor-edged. "Don't fret, Maddie," she said. "You'll be part of it as well." She tapped her screen. "After all, it's not every day a marketing executive gets caught moving money from her husband to an illicit partner's account that's front-page news." Maddie spun towards Ryan, her voice low and panicked. "Ryan, say something." Ryan avoided her gaze, already computing his exit strategy, scanning the room, realizing he had been tricked, penned in, and Ethan saw it, how self-preservation consumed everything else. Ryan took a deliberate breath, squared his shoulders, then did what Ethan anticipated. He implicated Maddie. "This wasn't me," Ryan declared abruptly, distancing himself from her. "I was unaware of the funds transfers. That was all, Maddie." Maddie recoiled like she had been struck. "Ryan, I see you're trying to negotiate here, but let's not play innocent," Ethan retorted. "I understand you and Maddie have a situation we can both acknowledge," Ethan continued as Ethan chuckled. "Attempting to blame me is futile when you have no solid evidence." Joel then interjected, showing his phone screen where Ryan's voice was heard. "An audio recording. Maddie wasn't expecting it. The funds will be under my name, and once they clear, we vanish," Ryan revealed, causing Maddie to stumble back. "You lowlife," she shot back, but Ryan's facade fell apart then. "Silence, Maddie. You knew what this was all along." The restaurant had fallen silent as the confrontations became heavier. Ethan eventually stood up, his chair pushed back, showing a steady resolve. He looked at Maddie, at Ryan, taking in the destruction they wrought together. Then he faced Charlotte. "Go ahead," he said. Charlotte struck her phone one last time, and instantly everyone was informed of everything. The atmosphere became heavy, yet before anyone could utter a word, a soft voice interrupted the tension. "Mr. Carter, sir?" Ethan glanced at the waiter who stood a few feet away, hands clasped in front of him, his expression hesitant. He appeared to be around 20 years old, displaying the uncertain look of someone deciding whether or not to speak up, yet eventually choosing truth over comfort. Ethan arched an eyebrow. "What is it?" The waiter swallowed, shifting his weight. In a hushed tone, he informed Ethan, "I believe you should know. She's been bringing him here for months." There was silence. Ethan didn't respond right away, not even flinching. He simply remained still, taking in the words, allowing them to permeate his skin, his very core. Maddie appeared tense opposite him, took a sharp breath audible to his ears, but he didn't turn towards her just yet. Instead, he fixed his gaze on the waiter, scrutinizing the truth in his demeanor, noticing his deliberate avoidance of looking at Maddie altogether, as if he had set off an explosion right at their table. "Are you certain?" Ethan queried, keeping his voice neutral. The waiter confirmed, now steadfast, as though he was resolute to stand by his statement. "Yes, sir. Same table is customary for them. Window seat. They're always here around this hour of the night. I recall it distinctly because they always order the same wine, the one you requested tonight." Ethan let out a long sigh, his jaw tensing up. It wasn't just an affair. It was in this very restaurant, the place he had chosen for its significance tonight, a place that held memories of anniversaries, promotions, birthdays, once their special place. Maddie moved restlessly in her chair, her fingers almost reaching for his, but pulling back instead. "Ethan," she started, but he looked at her then, and the expression on his face made her jaw clamp shut. "Were you too cowardly to cheat somewhere else?" she asked. His tone was soft, not harsh, yet it contained something so chilling, so deeply disheartened, that it cut sharper than any yell could. Maddie's lips parted, her eyes wide, searching for words to ease the tension. But he stopped her, shaking his head slowly. "Don't," he said. "Just. I see now. It wasn't just about lying, was it? It wasn't just about betrayal." He leaned closer, setting his forearms on the table, lowering his voice so she flinched. "You wanted to embarrass me. You wanted to do it where you knew I'd eventually discover." Pause. "Perhaps you even wanted me to find out. Perhaps you've made an error there." Maddie's face flushed, her fingers digging into the tablecloth. "That's incorrect," she whispered, yet her voice betrayed doubt. Ethan merely chuckled, shaking his head. "Irrelevant, since it has happened already, and now, it seems you are too." The restaurant door creaked open once more, the subtle ding of the entrance bell piercing the oppressive quiet that had enveloped the table. Initially, Maddie showed little response, her thoughts seemingly locked in an attempt to find a way out, but Ethan already knew who had just arrived before turning his head. The room's atmosphere altered, the kind of change brought about by someone not to be trifled with entering the premises. Camille Carter entered with the assurance that came from decades of dismantling men like Ryan Hale in courtrooms. Towering, composed, and undeterred by the situation's gravity, she moved decisively, a streamlined leather portfolio held under one arm, her countenance sharp and unyielding. Tonight, Camille, Ethan's older sister, transformed from her usual forceful self into something ominous, a judge, if you will. She ignored everyone else as she moved towards Ethan, offering him a silent show of support with a touch on his shoulder. Her focus then shifted to the man opposite Ethan, causing Ryan to stiffen. Maddie, noticing the change, furrowed her brow in confusion, which quickly turned into unease. "Camille, what's going on?" Camille paid no heed, placing a portfolio resoundingly on the table and meticulously unzipping it. In a motion that suggested she had been waiting for this moment, she took out a thick folder filled with printed documents and slammed it down in front of Ryan without uttering a word. Ethan watched as Ryan hesitated, his fingers trembling before he gathered his resolve to reach for the folder. He unveiled it, glancing hastily at the initial pages, and Maddie noticed the instant her complexion paled. Camille leaned subtly. "Proceed," she suggested softly yet menacingly. "Read it." Ryan remained silent. Disoriented, Maddie moved closer to scrutinize herself. Scarcely having read a few lines, she shuddered as if touched. Her lips opened and closed, but no words emerged. Ethan allowed the silence to persist, immersing her in it. Then he reclined in his seat, folding his arms across his chest. Maddie, he queried with an insidious lightness, how does it feel to realize you were merely a piece on a board? Maddie's Adam's apple bobbed as she swallowed forcefully, gripping the table's edge tightly. This can't be authentic. Camille raised an eyebrow. Oh, it certainly is. She flipped the pages before settling on one specific one. Reading aloud, she announced as if revealing decisive proof in a sensational trial, she's beneficial for now. She believes she's outsmarting me, but she doesn't comprehend that she's merely another pawn on the board. The words loomed over Maddie like a tightening noose. Her head jerked toward Ryan, her eyes wide with alarm. Deny this isn't true, she pleaded softly. Deny you said it. Ryan remained silent, not even meeting her gaze. This silence was all the affirmation she required. Maddie's hand shook, her body stiffening as the truth solidified within her. She had never been his partner, equal, or more than a fleeting diversion, a tool he intended to discard once she outlived her usefulness. Ethan exhaled, observing as the shards of whatever illusions she held on to disintegrated. Ryan pushed the folder aside, his jaw clenched. Have you considered yourself victorious? His tone was subdued yet brimming with unspent rage. Camille's smile wasn't pleasant, it portended ruin. Ah, darling, she said softly, we've merely begun. Ryan stood abruptly, hoping distance could free him from this instant. But Camille acted swiftly, positioning herself before him before he could take a step. Her voice became icy and piercing. Sit down, she commanded, her tone leaving no room for disagreement. Your affairs with me are incomplete. And with that, Ryan Hale found himself cornered, the first time all night, devoid of any escape routes. By dawn, the world was privy to everything. Ethan awoke to his phone persistently buzzing on the bedside table, notifications surging like waves hitting the coast. He endured the ringing, the vibrations, allowing it full reign. He was already aware of its message. As the city slumbered, Charlotte had been productive. The article became live at 5:42 a.m., and within minutes, it spread to all significant news platforms. Social media echoed with sensational headlines that rapidly multiplied. Top lawyer Ryan Hale involved in corruption, fraud, and scandalous relationship. Marketing Vice President Madeline Carter linked to financial fraud and corporate misconduct. The legal giant is facing disbarment following an investigation revealing decades of questionable practices. This wasn't a local issue. It made national headlines. Ethan eventually picked up his phone, sifting through the endless torrent of messages. They were messages from colleagues, business associates, former friends. Some were checking in, others offering congratulations. In their world, power struggles were frequent, but witnessing Ryan Hale's downfall was uncommon. And Maddie, she collapsed alongside him. He threw off the blankets and stood up, shaking off the remnants of the previous night's weight. Advancing towards the kitchen, he switched on the television, scrolling through channels until settling on a morning news program. The bottom of the screen displayed high-profile attorneys fall, corruption, blackmail, and an affair that brought it to an end. The journalist's tone was crisp, professional, yet piercing. However, the words carried a heavy impact. In a shocking expose revealed last night, Ryan Hale, a well-known corporate attorney notorious for his high-profile court battles, has been unveiled as being involved in deceitful business dealings, blackmail, and a 2-year affair with marketing executive Madeline Carter. Reports suggest that Hale employed unethical tactics, such as obstructing minority-led businesses from lucrative contracts, forging legal papers, and employing coercive methods against former business associates. Further disclosed financial documents suggest Carter, who was then married, channeled funds into an account belonging to Hale, supposedly as a precautionary measure to arrange a monetary exit strategy before the affair became public knowledge. Ethan observed the events unfold, taking in every detail. The scene switched to clips of Ryan departing from his law firm's headquarters, his posture rigid, mouth shut tight, pushing past journalists who bombarded him with questions. Mr. Hale, do you have a comment on the accusations? Is it accurate that your firm has severed ties with you? How do you respond to the victims of your legal machinations? Ryan remained silent, as there was no response capable of salvaging his situation now. His firm had severed their connection with him in the wake of the published article. The partners acted swiftly in preparing their official statement, making it apparent that they were disassociating themselves entirely. Hale and Associates denounces the actions detailed in recent reports and will comply with any impending probes. Starting now, Mr. Hale no longer has any affiliation with our company. Ethan smirked. For years, he had destroyed lives, and now his own life was spiraling out of control. The legal actions followed swiftly. By midday, several previous clients had spoken up, each bringing their own claims, each suing Ryan for fraud, contract breaches, and illegal business obstruction. Some cases needed time to develop, but others, they were already ironclad. He was facing disbarment. Jail wasn't out of the question. As for Maddie, her downfall was equally severe. The same news program moved on to a different story. Marketing executive let go due to financial misconduct accusations. It was all over. The firm dismissed her swiftly and publicly, accusing her of a violation of ethical standards and betrayal of trust. Essentially, they wanted no part in her affairs. The public reaction was particularly damaging. Her name became ubiquitous. Those who once shared weekends with wine tastings and lavish brunches deserted her like a doomed vessel. They weren't willing to risk their own standing by associating with her. Overnight, she lost it all: her job, social circle, the semblance of control. Ethan could only speculate about the content of her phone. Messages from friends who suddenly went silent. Calls from relatives inquiring about her actions. But what was missing? The message to him. It remained unsent. Was she too ashamed, too furious, or too mired in denial to reach out? However, it didn't matter because he wasn't there to rescue her. She had made her decisions. Now she must face the consequences. While Camille was ensuring that each victim of Ryan received justice, Ava Marshall, the businesswoman he had sabotaged, was already rebuilding her company with Camille's legal assistance. Nadia Lee, the woman he had blacklisted, was now preparing a public lawsuit. It was evident from Camille's statements to reporters that this wasn't merely about bringing down Ryan. It was about preventing men like him from wielding power again. As Ethan turned off the TV and leaned against the counter, he experienced something he hadn't in quite some time: tranquility. For the first time in months, possibly years, he no longer felt like he was struggling with unanswered questions. He no longer felt the burden of trying to mend something irreparably damaged. He felt liberated. Ryan and Maddie were left to gather the pieces. The knock arrived late, just past 9. A cautious, hesitant rhythm against the wooden door. Initially, Ethan didn't stir. He sat on the couch with a whiskey in hand, soft music playing, kids asleep upstairs. Only their rhythmic breathing mattered now. He knew who was outside before rising. Limp and weary, Maddie stood there. She no longer resembled the woman who'd sat confidently at the midnight bistro, brimming with arrogance, certainty, and self-protection. She seemed drained, her former armor stripped away. Her once well-groomed blonde hair hung limp around her face, makeup smudged, as if she had cried before arriving. Thin and pale, she stood in a too-light jacket for the cold night, fists clenched at her sides. Ethan remained still, waiting. She shifted, biting her lower lip, seemingly unsure of how to begin, how to entice him with her prepared plea. However, no words could spare her now. Eventually, her voice broke the quiet. "Ethan, I've lost everything." His hand tightened subtly on the doorknob, but his expression remained indecipherable. Maddie swallowed nervously, blinking rapidly. "Could we discuss something?" He allowed the words to linger, to hang in the chilly night air between them, as futile and pitiful as they were. "Let's talk." She wished to speak now. After everything, she had stood firm in the restaurant, assertive, telling him she was leaving. She had sat facing him as another man entered, the man she had chosen over him. She had intended to swindle him, to vanish into a dream she had fashioned in her mind. And when it all collapsed, when her crafted reality disintegrated into dust, she hadn't sought forgiveness from him. She'd come because she had no other place to turn. Maddie fidgeted, biting her lip. I wasn't clear-headed, Ethan. I made a blunder. I see that now. Her voice was frail, but contained a hint of hope. She hoped that if she appeared enough in distress, he would welcome her back. A blunder? That's not what Ethan thought. He let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head slowly. Not a blunder, Maddie. Forgetting an appointment is a blunder. Missing a flight is a blunder. What you did, that was deliberate. Maddie winced. Ethan, you deceived me, he continued, his voice steady. You swindled from me. You embarrassed me publicly. You discarded our relationship, our marriage, everything. For what reason? For a man who used you as a temporary diversion. Maddie denied vigorously, stepping forward. No, it wasn't like that. Stop, Ethan said sharply, his tone causing her to halt. Stop standing on my porch and deceiving me, not any longer. She seemed on the verge of shattering, her shoulders drawing in, her lip quivering. Ethan, please, her voice faltered. I've lost everything, no job, no home. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she wiped them away. I merely need a chance to rectify this. A hollow laugh escaped his lips. There is no us left, Maddie. There hasn't been for quite some time, and if you truly believed that showing up here would make me what? Simply accept you back? Forget all you've done. I wasn't of sound mind, she pleaded softly. I wasn't thinking rationally. Ethan slightly tilted his head, his face impassive. No, Maddie, you were thinking quite clearly. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. You were clear when you were secretly with Ryan for 2 years. You were clear when you withdrew money from our accounts. You were unequivocal when you allowed me to wait in that restaurant while you informed me about your departure from our relationship. You were unequivocal when you made your decision. Maddie's countenance folded. Ethan observed her, yet he felt nothing. No rage, no satisfaction, no elation, just clarity. She was inconsequential to him at that point. She was merely a woman who had once possessed everything and squandered it. Her voice was barely audible now. What am I supposed to do? For a brief instant, Ethan simply regarded her, gazed upon the ruins of the person she had degenerated into, and then, without uttering another word, without casting another glance, he closed the door on her. The bolt clicked, and it was complete. Ethan found comfort in the consistent rhythm of his hands working against wood, the aroma of sawdust, the coarse feel of raw materials under his fingertips, the crisp sound of a chisel carving into grain. It all became his escape, his therapy, his rejuvenation. What initially served as a diversion soon turned into an obsession. He invested long nights in the garage, sculpting, smoothing, constructing. There was an immense sense of fulfillment in transforming raw and unpolished materials into something elegant and durable. Contrary to his marriage, unlike the life he had once fought so desperately to maintain, this was something that could not deceive him. Initially, he crafted furniture for personal use, producing items as substitutes for what Maddie had taken upon leaving. A sturdy dining table where his children could gather and share meals. A bookshelf for his daughter, who had recently developed a passion for reading. A custom-made desk for his son, who required a tranquil space to work on school projects. It began modestly, but the news spread. A neighbor noticed a coffee table he made and inquired about commissioned works. Then, a colleague from work requested a tailor-made shelving unit. Before long, he found himself with more orders than he could manage, and what had been an outlet for coping had blossomed into a flourishing enterprise. It felt gratifying. He constructed something personal, something expanding, something within his dominion. No guile or deceit marked this endeavor, merely his skill, perspiration, and dedication. Transforming ordinary wood into worthwhile artifacts was his routine. It was on this day that he crossed paths with her Sophie Dawson, who subtly yet profoundly entered his life, akin to browsing through the pages of a captivating book. She ran an unpretentious, local bookstore. Amidst the dwindling number of such establishments, it retained the nostalgic scent of authentic paper and ink, where people perused shelves instead of screens. On a Saturday, seeking a book for his child, he found himself face to face with the woman who would alter everything. In contrast to Maddie's polished, calculated demeanor, Sophie exuded warmth, simplicity, and honesty. She had a conversational style that put people at ease, and she smiled in an unpretentious manner. When Ethan Carter paid for his purchase, she recognized his name from the card reader, saying, "Ethan Carter, isn't that the same man who crafts furniture? I admired your work at a friend's house the other day. It's amazing." This surprised him, as he wasn't accustomed to being acknowledged for something unrelated to controversy or scandal. Unsure of how to respond, he merely nodded. "Indeed, that's me," she smiled back. "By any chance, would you consider building bookshelves for my store?" And so it began gradually, simply, without ulterior motives or intricacies. Over the ensuing months, Ethan constructed bookshelves for her shop, and she provided him with coffee when he delivered them. She showed genuine interest in his work, asking thoughtful questions and attentively listening to his responses. They conversed about topics devoid of pain, topics such as preferred books, recollections from childhood, desired travel destinations. It was effortless. For a prolonged period, Ethan believed he would never trust another person. Maddie's betrayal had instilled caution, made him scrutinize every purpose, every plan. Yet Sophie, she asked for nothing, exerted no pressure, delved not into his past. She simply appeared, day by day, moment by moment, until Ethan noticed he no longer tensed around her. One evening, upon completing the last shelf for her, she offered him a beer instead of coffee. They sat on the bookstore floor, with their backs against the counter, the fragrance of freshly cut wood intermingling with the alluring scent of old books. "Have you ever pondered expansion?" she inquired, looking at him. "Transforming the woodworking into something more substantial." He took a leisurely sip of his drink, contemplating. "I'm unsure. I appreciate its size." She found it intimate. Pausing to think, she agreed, "That's logical, but I believe more individuals need to witness your artistry. It's unique." He had received praise before, from patrons, from acquaintances. Yet, when she spoke, it didn't feel like empty compliments. It felt genuine. A moment of quiet tension stretched between them, peaceful yet electric. Sophie appeared ready to speak, then halted. Ethan turned his gaze slightly, watching her. "What?" he chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Nothing. I was just... I appreciate this." She looked at him, eyes kind. "I enjoy your company." A sensation in Ethan's heart eased. It was a simple declaration, casual on the surface, but it impacted him more than he anticipated. He put down his beer, facing her fully. "I feel the same way about you." Sophie smiled, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something he thought had vanished forever. On that particular Monday, Ethan had been anticipating Ryan's final tactic. It materialized as a lawsuit. The documents were delivered by an unsmiling courier who barely met Ethan's gaze before handing over the envelope. Ethan didn't need to read it to know its contents. Consistent with his pattern, Ryan Hale was as predictable as any man who had amassed power through arrogance and manipulation. The allegation, defamation. Ryan was filing a suit for irreversible damage to reputation, loss of professional standing, and emotional distress. The irony would have been comical if it weren't so pitiful. A man who had spent decades wrecking lives now claimed to be the wronged party. Sitting at his kitchen table, Ethan skimmed through the legalese, barely suppressing a grin. Ryan was clutching at straws. His career was in decline, his name tarnished, his former associates treating him as if he were contagious. His disbarment proceedings were yet to conclude, but it was clear where they were headed. Lawsuits against him had accumulated, filed by clients, former business associates, and those he had mistreated throughout his career. Was this the stand he wished to make his final stand? Pitiful. Ethan set down the documents, picked up his phone, and dialed. Camille picked up on the first ring. "I take it you filed," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Indeed, Hale had submitted his papers. Ethan let out a sigh, leaning back in his chair. "You're right." Camille chuckled, a laugh that hinted at her being several steps ahead. He just made the gravest error of his life. A week later, they stood in court. Ryan appeared polished but worn, like a man trying to feign control he no longer had. His suit was well-tailored, his hair styled perfectly, yet his eyes betrayed him. He was on the brink. He walked in composed, prepared, completely unfazed. The hearing proceeded swiftly. Ryan's attorney spoke at length about damaged reputation, false claims, and an alleged conspiracy against him. The attorney depicted Ryan as a victim of a calculated slander operation, accusing Ethan of deliberately ruining his professional standing with ill intent. It was then Camille's turn. She stood, her posture relaxed yet authoritative, and in under 5 minutes she undermined everything. She presented the evidence: emails, recorded phone calls, fraudulent contracts. She demonstrated the sequence of events, proving that Ethan's revelations were facts, not slander. Then, with calculated precision, she unveiled new evidence. A sealed file was placed on the judge's desk. Ryan tensed up. Ethan leaned forward, watching his adversary finally acknowledge he had stepped into his own downfall. Camille spoke calmly and in control. "This is a sworn affidavit from one of Mr. Hale's former associates detailing his direct involvement in case manipulation, illegal payoffs, and falsified court documents. Facts, not accusations." Pause. Ryan's attorney spoke. Ethan fell silent. No room for debate remained. Ryan's complexion paled, his self-assured demeanor shattered instantly. The truth had penetrated him, palpable in that moment. He conceded defeat. The judge made no delay. In that instant, the lawsuit was terminated, and within 24 hours, Ryan's disbarment became official. By week's end, he had vanished. No declaration, no press releases, no struggle. A mere echo of his former self, escaping the debris of his own construction. Ethan never caught sight of him again, nor did he turn to look back. The sunset cast a golden glow over the backyard, elongating shadows on the well-manicured lawn. Jubilant laughter filled the air as Ethan watched his children play tag near the oak tree at the yard's end. Ethan's son, now a teenager, continued to be as watchful towards his younger sister as ever, yet their relationship had mellowed with a deeper bond emerging from the passage of time. Ethan was seated on the porch, a chilled beer nestled on the armrest of his hand-crafted chair, his digits lightly drumming against the wood he'd built himself. The house, yard, and even the indoor furniture were all products of his labor, tangible evidence of permanence. By his side, Sophie was leaning against the railing, taking sips from a teacup, her gaze lingering on the children with a tender, satisfied look. Over time, she had become an integral part of Ethan's life, her influence permeating their daily moments as organically as breathing. Unlike replacing something, she had simply integrated herself into everything that surrounded them. For the first time in years, Ethan no longer felt the need to constantly keep a watchful eye. He wasn't yearning for the past to resurface, nor bearing the burden of another's deception. He had spent an extended period contemplating why it transpired, seeking logic in the chaos, trying to pinpoint his errors, but now it held no significance. Agony had guided him here. If Maddie hadn't entered that restaurant and fractured his existence, he wouldn't have discovered this peace, love, life. Sophie stirred beside him, subtly adjusting her gaze towards him. "You seem preoccupied," she pondered softly. He sighed, nodding while offering a slight smile, simply contemplating. She smirked, "Perilous." Ethan laughed, taking a swig of his beer before meeting her eyes. "Ever reflect on how life unfolds, how sometimes the most devastating events steer us in the right direction?" Sophie pondered this for a while, her gaze softening. "Indeed," she responded, giving a nod. "It's something I often ponder." Ethan turned to his children, his heart swelling in a way he once thought unattainable. "Betrayal isn't the end," he whispered more to himself than to her, "but rather the commencement of something grander. Strength doesn't lie in avoiding pain, but in surpassing it." Sophie reached for his hand, entwining their fingers, and as the sun sank on the horizon, Ethan was certain, beyond any doubt, that the most captivating chapters of his life were yet to be penned. Ethan allowed his eyes to roam over the yard, observing the final rays of sunlight drape across the lawn, coloring the world in a golden hue. The gentle wind whispered through the trees, echoing the sound of his children's laughter. He took a deep, leisurely breath, feeling the heaviness not of the past, but of the present. This present moment was constructed from ruins, and it felt wonderful to be on stable ground once more. He lazily twirled his beer bottle between his fingers, his hold loose, his shoulders carefree. Sophie softly squeezed his hand before rising, gathering their empty glasses. "I'm heading inside," she said, flashing that familiar smile, the one that had evolved into a silent comfort in his life. She didn't have to speak more. She comprehended him in ways that transcended words. Ethan observed her walk indoors, then let out a long sigh, redirecting his gaze towards the horizon. His thoughts meandered for a brief instant, recalling all the turns and tribulations that had brought him here. The treachery, the turmoil, the tumble of those who believed themselves invulnerable. Maddie hadn't recovered from her fall. I was told she was working temporary jobs, barely making ends meet, a shadow of the woman who at one time thought herself above the life she had abandoned. And Ryan disappeared, faded from the city, his name only mentioned in hushed whispers when people spoke about the lawyer who lost everything amidst a scandal too immense to hide. Eventually, the man who believed he could control, swindle, and wreak havoc without repercussions had dwindled into nothing more than a lesson for caution. Karma played its part as it always does. Ethan smirked slightly, shaking his head. He turned back toward the camera, leaning slightly forward, placing his elbows on his knees. His expression changed. "Not enraged, not embittered, just aware," he said, voice low and steady. "Have you ever witnessed karma at work?" He allowed the words to linger, his eyes sparkling with something sharp, something undeniable. Share your most outrageous tales of karma in the comments below. He sat back, allowing the invitation to hang, letting the weight of the question settle. As the screen slowly dimmed to black, bold words flashed across it, a final message lingering like an echo. True strength doesn't reside in escaping hardship. Rather, it lies in overcoming it. Your history may shatter you, or it may mold you. The decision rests with you.